guess the summary in a way is that the new world of work is here and now. We've wasn't a kind of massive revelation, but we have discovered that yes, the new ways of working are here, they're with us, they're not something in the future. And the report tries to sort of take stock, what's changed and what's changed for the good, what's still in flux, what are we still thinking about? Because I think almost everyone we spoke to said, look, there's still lots of things to work out here. So we're trying some things or we're experimenting, but there's a lot of stuff to still work out. And that probably won't settle down for a while, we guess. We surveyed 94 companies across a whole range of sectors and sizes, and more in the UK than anywhere else, but there was an international representation. We did 14 in-depth interviews and reviewed some literature around the subject. So that's I hope you've seen it. If you haven't, it's there online for you to read in detail, and we won't go through all of it today, obviously, so you'll need to look at it afterwards. Some concepts, these are not new concepts, but just so that, some definitions, if you like, sort of 3 definitions around flexible working, employees who are able to flex their start and finish times. Hybrid working, a type of flexible working where employees split time between the office and home or somewhere else, I guess. And remote working, where people just work remotely from any given location. You can find other definitions, but that was kind of the set of working definitions that we've used. So where are we now? Clearly, hybrid and flexible working has become the norm, at least for now. Maybe it develops, but it has become the norm, at least for now. And 87% of people we surveyed said, yes, that is now the norm in our organisation. There are exceptions. We will hear one or two today who have said, perhaps that kind of very flexible arrangement is not quite right for us because of our company environment. But in the main, people said hybrid working's here to stay. And, we all know this, but they said 2 or 3 days in the office is the most common configuration at the moment. So, that will change and differ, but that's kind of where we stand at the moment. Are these new working practices seen as positive? And I think, if you go back, there's probably an attitude that prevailed in lots of organisations and with lots of leaders that said, we don't like this working from home business, we don't like this flexible working business. I like to see the people in the office in front of me so that I can, keep an eye on them all, make sure they're working hard. That might have been an attitude that was in some environments in which we've all worked. But people are seeing the new way of working as positive. So nearly 60% said that they felt that the new way of working had a positive impact on productivity. And we've heard this a lot, people saying, when people working at home, they don't get interrupted, they don't have travel time and all that stuff, so, are more productive. I guess I just queried at the bottom of the slide there, how do we measure productivity in our organisations? But anecdotally, people feel that that's been positive, as has communication with teams, which is kind of a bit counterintuitive. But I think what we're saying is we've made loads of effort to make sure that we do communicate well with our teams when they're not all sitting around in the same place. And it's kind of turbocharged our approach to communication and engagement. I think there are, as you go down that chart, you can see it all, but at the lower end of positiveness, there are queries around things like how do we build a positive culture or support and develop our culture together when we're not together most of the time? How do we manage high performance? Are we able in this system to identify and support our high potential people, bring them through? Talent management as a broader category of that. And the performance management, how do we manage low performance as well when it's not as obvious, people are not sitting around and being visible to us. So, mixed, but generally positive, but there are still some uncertainties around some of these areas. And how do we measure? And I would say we all need to think in HR about how we do measure some of these things. Some of them are more obvious. We use surveys, etc., to measure levels of engagement or whatever, and others less so. Attitudes to the new practices are broadly positive. So 88% said that the organisation was positive towards these things, or somewhat or significantly positively. On the bottom left there, employees are a bit more positive than leaders. I mean, they're both quite positive if you take the blue and the gold band. But you can see that the employee band, 60% are significantly more positive about the new practices compared to 34% of leaders. I think that might have been changing and developing over the last, and again, anecdotally over a last period, because I think our leaders have also got to like this way of working. We'll come back to it because we've got to think about that. Leaders have, to do some of their own work, but they also have to work with teams, and so how they work is also important. But perhaps leaders getting a bit more positive about that would be my sort of anecdotal take. Barriers. We asked people, what are the barriers to flexible working and hybrid working, etc.? What gets in the way? And people talked about a reluctance to return to the office. I think probably lots of people are working on that. We'll come back to it, but and 2 years or 2 years plus is a long time. People have changed habits and formed new habits. Some people have become very nervous about the big bad world, etc. So sometimes it's kind of hard to make that shift and get people back in the office. What's that experience between if I go into the office versus someone who works more remotely? Do we have the same experience? Is one better or worse? And it can go either way, I think. And again, people see in the report, people taking a lot of care about how you manage when some people are with you in the room and some people are not. There was one example, I think it was from Shell, where they said when we're meeting, if any of the people are remote and dialing in, we all dial in. So we sit at our laptops, wherever we are in the office, and we all have the same experience so that it doesn't feel like, you're having a conversation around the table there in the office and I feel a bit left out. Management capabilities, just said it there, but we're asking our managers to do all sorts of things that they haven't done before, to manage in a different way, to manage hybrid teams, to manage projects where not everybody's together. I mean, to say that they've never done any of that, but it's become, central now. So, do our managers have the capability to do that? How much help and support have we given them? I was to get a little bit annoyed about people who say, oh, flipping managers, they won't do it properly, etc. Well, it's our job to help them and support them and give them the stuff they need to do it. So management capability. Reluctance, as I was saying earlier, of some leaders don't like this way of working. They're perhaps, you could call them traditionalists, I don't know, but they prefer to have people in the office together. It's kind of easier in a way, isn't it? You can't blame them. Are we seeing unfairnesses between groups? So everything I've said up to now relates really to people who work in offices. Well, not everybody works in an office. And it was Sue, actually, our next speaker, who said to me, not all about offices, we've got, you've got retail outlets, you've got factories and warehouses and service workers, who didn't stop working, by the way. They were out there doing their jobs. And they don't have the luxury of working from home because that's not how their job works. So we mustn't forget that, and we must think about that fairness of how we treat people. I don't know what it feels like if you're in, say, manufacturing, and then all the people on your manufacturing site who work in offices are all sitting with their feet up at home, apparently, and you're turning the wheels of industry. How does that feel? Do you feel like you've lost out something along the way? And I think there's a query around diversity and inclusion. Can you create? Is this way of working as inclusive as a traditional way of working? I don't think we fully know the answer, but I think there are question marks around it, and you perhaps have to work a little bit harder to make sure everyone's included when, they're not all in the same place at the same time. This coming back now to the return to the office, and 67% of our sample said that they were experiencing some difficulty, either significant or somewhat difficult times in getting people back in the office. And a few pointers that people have spoken to us about, and we've quoted here about, be clear about the purpose of being in the office. And I think Ravin, when he talks to us later, will talk about this. What is the unique benefit you get from being together in an office versus something else? We found that 60% of our sample were rethinking how they use office space, creating different environments. People talk about collaborative environments, etc. Are we making those physical working environments more attractive and fit for purpose? So if you want to encourage people back, generally speaking, we're seeing people using the carrot rather than the stick, and people going to some quite extreme lengths to make the workplace attractive. You know, one of the people we interviewed talked about a new office they had, or an office they had in a city centre, and they designated a whole floor to well-being. So they would run yoga classes and Pilates, and they had a, you know, cappuccino bar, and they had things for people to do, activities, etc., that people would say, "Oh, that's attractive." They were subsidising the food in their restaurant and having lovely, healthy food options paid for by the company. This is all extra expense, but people say, no, that's important because we want people to feel like this is a good place to come and work, and we want to attract new people to come and work to our environments. And we think, importantly, we want to make these decisions based on the type and nature of work rather than a fixed policy about what we believe about work. And we're going to come back to policy versus guidance a little bit later on. We've got a quote from Jonathan of Costa Coffee, who said, "We've taken the carrot approach to bringing people back into our support centres. We've been encouraging, suggesting and asking rather than mandating." And I think that was probably the majority view. And we've seen what's happened. I'm going to come back to that as well, with a very prominent company, Apple, as they tried to enforce a sort of return to work policy. Shouldn't laugh, should I? But you know, they're finding that difficult, and their employees are reacting. Just let you read that. So apologies to those who've cancelled Rudyard Kipling for being too colonial or imperialist, but I think they're still wise words. I heard that Manchester University students had decided to paint over, you know, his famous poem is "If," you know, if you can keep your head, etc. Have painted over that at Manchester University, as they didn't like the connotations. But if you'll excuse that, what we're thinking about is, you know, the what and the why and the when and the how, the where and the who of work. We have to answer all these questions together. And I think why is a really important one. You know, why do we come to work, or why do we work in a particular way? And we've seen the growth of sort of purposeful companies, rather than, I think you call them, relatable organisations. So we've got to think about all these questions. The report goes into all of these things, the whens and the wheres of work, etc. We're just going to pick on a couple, and the others we're going to bring out through our case study discussions. And I just wanted to talk about the who. And the who in this case is, who decides? Who makes this decision? You know, we saw during the pandemic a kind of a shift towards kind of employee power, if you like, that, you know, people could make their choices about how they worked, etc. Companies were trying to be very flexible to accommodate that because they wanted to protect people's well-being, they wanted to not to lose anyone, they wanted to attract some more people. So who makes that decision? And I don't know if you've been following the sort of public spat that's going on within Apple, with groups of employees writing to the executive saying, and here, read it in case you can't see it, "We'd like to take the opportunity to communicate a growing concern amongst our colleagues. The Apple's remote location working policy has already forced some of our colleagues to quit. Without inclusivity and flexibility brings many of us feel we have to choose between our families, our well-being, and being empowered to do our best work, or being part of Apple." So people feeling that, you know, that is a stark choice. Am I going to work the way I want to work, or am I going to work for Apple, which might not be the way I want to work? And just, was it yesterday, a very senior executive, the person in charge of AI at Apple, which you'd guess is a pretty important job, artificial intelligence, has quit on this very issue. And that is a very senior and public person resigning. So the so-called Great Resignation, it was probably more of a Great Resignation in the US. I think I read that 57 million people changed jobs in 2020. That's about a third of their workforce in the US sort of turned over or quit their original job. In the UK, there were surveys estimating that 1 in 3 would resign if they couldn't have, you know, their sort of favoured pattern of home working. So that's pretty strong. You know, will we see that change as, you know, feels a bit like we're not, apparently, according to the Bank of England, not quite a recession, but we might have 2 non-consecutive quarters of zero growth. But you know, as that market tightens up a bit, I don't know how that will be. We asked people, have you had experience of people either not joining you because they didn't like the way you managed flexible working or leaving you? Only about 10% said that they had that actual experience. But anecdotally, there were others who said, it's now become the first question at interview, what is your hybrid working policy? And I've heard it asked from two angles. From some people who say, because I want to be in an office where I can be around my colleagues and learn and communicate and develop, etc. And from others who said, because I want to work from home a portion of the time to manage, the things I've got to manage at home, etc. And work that way. So it's pretty tricky for poor old HR again to say, you've got both of those things going on, what's your answer to the question and how do you manage it?